You're listening to Bible Truth Feed, a podcast by christadelphianvideo.org for Christadelphians and all those seeking the truth about the Bible message. Join us now as we present our latest episode. Why you can trust God's promises. Hello and welcome to Bible Truth Feed, a podcast by Christadelphian Video. What are some of the assurances that God gives in his handbook, the Bible? The Bible shows how these assurances and covenants give hope for the future, and this is all explained in this latest episode.
Now that's promises, plural. Did you know that God made promises? What is a promise? In its most basic definition, we understand it as an assurance given to one or more parties by another party or parties that the initiator of the assurance will do something or give something, or that they will not. In this context, then, we are going to look at what God, the party initiating the assurances, has promised, and to whom these assurances, these promises, were given. And we can only do that by turning to the book that contains a record of them. It is known as the Holy Bible, the world's best-selling book year in, year out for centuries. When we open our Bible, one thing that strikes us about these promises is that when God pronounces them, he does so by way of statement or declaration. In effect, this is what I will do, he says. Or, as our definition provides, he gives an assurance. So why do I make this point at the outset? Because we will not find God using the word promise when he makes these pronouncements. But we understand that what he is saying is his assurance. His assurance amounts to a promise that he will do or give something. So it's to the Old Testament that we turn to see the origins of these promises. And as I said, it is not how God reveals them or describes them. It is the New Testament's commentary on these assurances that are laid down in the Old Testament that we read of them in specific terms of being promises, as we had in our reading tonight in 2 Peter chapter 1. We'll get back to that towards the end of our talk. And the New Testament is full of references back to the Old Testament in regards to these things, as we're going to consider. Broadly, in the Bible, there is one all-encompassing statement, declaration, assurance, and based on that principle, there are three main promises being developed. They're all interrelated, they're connected. Linking into them are a number of other promises which expand the application of the initial promises. Now that one basic principle which we must never lose sight of is God's repeated assurance in words such as are declared in Numbers chapter 14 and verse 21, where God says, "As truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord." Yes, it's repeated at other times in almost identical words. And everything else in the Bible revolves around this grand theme of glory to God and man confessing it. From here on, I will tend not to speak of assurances. I will use promises to treat the title under consideration, why you can trust God's promises. As we proceed, we will come across other words which the Old Testament does use in this context, and even in more strong terms than the word promise. Thus far, the groundwork. Let's get to what constitutes these promises, then come to appreciate why we can trust them. A promise is only of any value if it is held to. And as I just stated, there are three main aspects which God's promises encompass. If you can't trust the one making the promise, then there's not much value putting your confidence in it. Now we have to go back to the book of beginnings to see the genesis of these things. Indeed, the Genesis record of what took place in Eden and how what transpired is considered the first of God's promises. And for mankind, this is supremely important. Without this promise, there would be no need for any other promises. It would have been game over with no prospects for humankind if this first of the promises back in Eden was not made. The words used in Genesis chapter 3 that we'll look at are as brief as they are profound. Genesis 3 relates the outcome of a remarkable interaction which led to the first sin being committed, an act that introduced mortality and death to the human race. At this point in time of the history of the world, there was only Adam and Eve. If God had enacted his ruling then and there, it would have been the end for the race. But in his mercy, he did not withdraw his breath of life. He did not withdraw their breath of life from that pair on the spot. That is, they were not immediately struck down dead for that transgression that they committed. And while mortality and death became the lot of that pair of sinners and all their progeny that would soon and later come from them, God made a promise that would give them and their progeny from that day to this day what the Bible calls hope. Without this promise, there was and there is no hope. Well, surely you're thinking, this sounds very important. And you'd be right, it is. Now, we really want to be able to trust this divine statement and its import, what it opens up to us. Now, as I've suggested, the words used are simple words, yet they are profound in what they represent. And we read of the judgment and several determinations in that chapter of Genesis 3 which God makes when he's addressing the upshot of what had taken place with those that were implicated. What we refer to as the promise is set out in verse 15 of Genesis 3. Here it is on the screen. Genesis 3 verse 15. God says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. He shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Well, what does that mean? Who is speaking here? And to whom is this being spoken? Well, perhaps I can paraphrase it so we might understand these words a little clearer. I, that's the Lord God speaking, He says, I am going to put conflict, enmity, conflict between you, the serpent, and Eve. And having declared this, then it says the Lord God proceeds to announce that it will manifest itself throughout the ages to come and will be between carnal-minded descendants who follow serpent-like thinking and spiritually minded people who follow God-like thinking. A few chapters on in Genesis, they are summed up in terminologies such as sons of God, daughters of men. Two opposing ideologies, this conflict, this enmity. Now, we also noted reference in that verse 15 to thy seed, thy seed and her seed. Thy seed and her seed. Seed has a reference to that which comes from them, like their offspring. Thy seed here speaks to those who follow the ways of the serpent mind, and her seed, the ways of God. But before unpacking the remainder of verse 15, which we'll do with this Bible hindsight now to help us, we need to be aware that the seed of the woman is ultimately a reference to Jesus Christ. So there's the same verse, and I've highlighted different words to show who is being referred to. So the I is the Lord God who makes this declaration to put enmity between thee. So the thee and the thy seed and thy and thou are all talking about the serpent. The woman and her seed and he and his heel are talking about the Lord Jesus Christ. And as I said, hindsight allows us to use this knowledge to go back and understand the meaning of verse 15, which added a he and a his. Right? Thy seed, her seed, and his and he. Now, this is Jesus Christ, the he and the his. Jesus Christ, in his determination to honour God and to forward his purpose. The thy and the thou of the verse are what the ways of the serpent would lead to. Sin, conflict, death. All that is in the world, all those things that are in opposition to divine ways. Now, there are a number of Bible references that reveal that Jesus is the seed of the woman to whom this promise was pointing. Not only this Edenic promise, we call it Edenic because it was given back in the Garden of Eden, in Eden, right? But the other promises, the other two, I said there were three main ones, the other two that we'll consider as we go through. So I'll leave off further identification until we review those next two promises. However, with this knowledge, we're now able to conclude that the bruising of the head and the bruising of the heel have direct bearing on the life and the work of Jesus Christ. Jesus, would bruise the serpent's head, and the serpent would bruise Jesus' heel. So what is that work? What was that work of Jesus that would involve this thing? Christ would have victory over sin and death because he himself was sinless. He destroyed the power of sin. That's a fatal blow, the power of sin, a fatal blow, spoken of here as a bruising on the head, a real blow to the head. Whereas the bruising of the heel was seen as that necessary but temporary death when the workers of evil, in opposition to divine ways, crucified Jesus Christ, took his life. That was compared to a non-fatal blow, wound to the heel. as opposed to the fatal blow to the serpent head. And that would ultimately prove fatal. That is, the former resulted in a personal resurrection after 3 days in the grave, and the latter speaks of a time when death will completely be a thing of the past, when death will be overcome through the work of Jesus Christ. Now, this is the essence of God's first promise, back at the foundation of the world, as those events in Genesis 3 are later described. So definitely, we have seen hope was put before mankind at that time and was described in symbolic and figurative terms, as we can see from those words. So, let's once more look at it in the light of this, and we can sum it up with a final paraphrase to say what these words, these simple words, actually mean in our understanding. So it's I, the Lord God, will put this ongoing conflict between you, serpent, and Eve, between those of mankind who follow your fleshly thinking ways and her descendant, Jesus Christ, who will follow divine ways. He's going to overcome the flesh and deliver a fatal blow to your head, resulting in the overthrow of sin and death. And in doing so, he will sustain a bruise to the heel, which will be evidenced in his short death. Yes, that's a lot of words, isn't it? My paraphrase is a lot of words to explain these symbols and this parable, which was concisely stated in those few words in that verse. Brief but profound, as I mentioned earlier. Now, the second lot of our 3 main promises was made about 2,000 years further on from this time, from the events in Eden. We're still in the book of Genesis when we encounter a man whom the Bible refers to at length as Abraham, though in the early mentions of him we find him under the name of Abram. Not a big difference linguistically, Abram and Abraham, but in the Jewish language there is a significant difference. Significant one to note that this new name was a God-given name, Abraham, because it pertained to the expanding of God's promises directly concerning the man. Perhaps you've heard of that name before. Maybe you're familiar with Abraham or the promises, or perhaps you're not. Or maybe you're aware of both. But let's go through these things. There is this other promise, not spoken of as being a promise as such, by God in the Genesis record, but we will see the way that God does consider these words that he presents. Very strong terms used by God, as I intimated some moments back, and as I said, expanding the promises to Abraham as he goes, inasmuch as God was building on them, adding to them, enlarging the scope of the promise in its application as to what they would mean, the words would mean in the long term. The words God spoke to Abraham are found across several chapters in the book of Genesis. We read in Genesis 12 where God calls upon Abraham to depart from the country of his birth, right, to leave his family connections down in Ur, in the land of Chaldea, down in Mesopotamia. Right, he has to leave that area. He's got to travel to another country that God will show him. That's in Genesis 12 and verse 1. Now, attached to this request to leave and come to this other place that God would show him are these words in verses 2 to 3. Genesis 12, verse 2 to 3. All right, and this is God. Remember I said the definition of a promise was one making an assurance to another? Well, this is the one making assurance. God, I will do this, I will do this. This is God making this assurance that we will refer to as a promise. And what's he going to do? He's going to make of Abraham a great nation. Bless him, make his name great. He would be a blessing. I will bless them that bless thee. I will curse him that curses thee. And in thee all families of the earth would be blessed. So it's a multifaceted assurance, a multifaceted promise given here by God. And once again we find God making this statement, this declaration, giving this assurance. And as I said, even though in Genesis the word promise is not used, based on our definition that we saw earlier, the assurance by one party to do or to give something to another party, this is a promise. We cite these momentous words as being in that form of which we understand a promise. And what is God promising to do for Abraham? Well, broadly, to develop from him a great nation, bless him personally, make his name great, and through him all families of the earth would be blessed. This blessing would flow out to all nations. Right now, it's got a long tail to these promises, as we're going to see. Now, it's of immense interest to note that the New Testament quotes from these words. When in Galatians chapter 3, it declares that they form the embryo of the gospel. The good news, if you like, the good message, the gospel of the blessings to come upon all nations based on what was spoken to Abraham. Reading on in the book of Genesis, we see the enlargement of these points, as I said, and the introduction of another aspect. He builds on this, God builds on this base, and he enlarges on it. Which we encountered, he enlarged on the promise that we encountered in Genesis 3 about a seed. Here's another blessing. It talks about a seed, a descendant, that would now come through Abraham. Not just through Eve, same seed, but now it's going to come through Abraham. And to comprehend the significance of these words and realise that they are the crux of God's dealings with Abraham, we move forward and we compare what we've already seen declared with what God next says to this great man about a seed, a descendant, one coming through Abraham. God presses home this fact several times between Genesis chapter 12 verse 7 and Genesis chapter 22 verse 18. He talks about it a number of times. A seed is being spoken of through those chapters. And between these two posts in Genesis 12 and Genesis 22, we have mentions in chapters 13, 15, 17, where God enlarges on these promises. Now, as we come to look at this, you will recall that I said the word promise doesn't appear in the Genesis record of God's words to Abraham. And I said back then that he uses even more strong words, in my opinion, when making these pronouncements. Now, seven times through Genesis 15 and Genesis 17, God employs the word covenant. Right? That's the word God uses. For example, in Genesis 17, verses 5 to 7. Now here's Genesis 17, verses 5 to 7. Here's the I. This is the one making the declarations, the assurances, the promises. And this is what he's going to do. Father of many nations I have made you, he says. I'll make you exceeding fruitful. I'll make nations of you, and kings shall come out of you. I will establish my covenant. Right? We said the word promise wasn't there. This is a stronger word. My covenant between me and you and thy seed, Abraham, and after thee, in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and to your seed after you. Right? God's going to establish a covenant, an everlasting covenant. Now, it would have an immediate effect with Abraham's seed, that is, his son Isaac, who was recipient of the same promises as his father. Right? What God promised to Abraham, he reiterated to Isaac about blessing, an inheritance and a seed. And God said he would perpetuate this through Isaac. So God's words in Genesis 17 verse 19, Genesis 17 verse 19, we find these words: God said to Sarah, Abraham's wife Sarah, God said of Sarah, Abraham's wife, Sarah shall have a child, right? She shall bear thee a son indeed, it says in that chapter 17, verse 19. Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son indeed. You will call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant. Here it is again. My covenant with him, an everlasting covenant with him and his seed after him. See the ongoing promise that God made there? And when speaking to Isaac directly, in Genesis 26 verse 23, right, God spoke that to Abraham about Sarah and the covenant through Isaac. God says to Isaac, this is Isaac now being spoken to, I, the one who I'm going to give this insurance, will perform the oath. He uses this word, oath, which I swear unto Abraham. Aren't these strong expressions, strong words to be sure? And what it shows us is that those statements, which you read as coming from God, and which we call a promise, God calls a covenant. He holds them as being a sworn oath. Could it be expressed in any stronger terms? Probably not. A sworn oath, a covenant. Now, I want to turn to Hebrews, certainly not as a digression, but to tie these points together with this reference from Hebrews chapter 6. Hebrews chapter 6, we're looking at these two verses 13 and 17. For when God made promise, remember I said the New Testament uses the word promise when speaking about what God said in the Old Testament. The Old Testament doesn't refer to these as promise, but the New Testament does. And when God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, wherein God, willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel. That means it cannot change, immutable. It doesn't mutate, it's not changeable. This promise will not change. He confirmed it by an oath. You can see the words used concerning what God had assured to Abraham. Right? He told Abraham to do these things. He said to Isaac, this is my oath which I swear to your father. And here in the book of Hebrews, letter to the Hebrews, it's picking up on what was said, and it's a promise, a sworn oath. There are two aspects to Abraham's seed that we need to take on board. First, that it applied to the great nation which would come through him, as we noted in the prophecy in Genesis chapter 12. And as the record unfolds, it becomes clear that the nation spoken of is the nation of Israel. the descendants of Abraham. Right, we looked at Isaac. His son was Jacob. He was the father of the 12 tribes. And his name, 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So we see it as we go down through the record. Now I touched on this when I mentioned Galatians chapter 3 a few moments back, and I connected what was said to Abraham in Genesis 12 with the gospel as Paul tied it in Galatians chapter 3. And we want to go there now just to pick up on another point that it takes up there in Galatians 3 and verse 16. Now this is Galatians 3 verse 16. Taking us back to Genesis, where it says, to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. Okay, so here we are picking up on promise. Abraham and his seed were the promises made. Now he is the one that made the promise, God. He said not. He didn't say seeds, plural, right? Not many, he's not talking about many seeds. He's talking about one seed. He said, to thy seed, which is Christ. The seeds many, that is the plural form, refers to the national blessing that I spoke of, right, to make a great nation from Abraham, but there is a more specific purpose in this promise, and it revolves around a singular seed. One individual, verse 16 says, which is Christ. Right? The one seed that we're looking and focusing in on, says God, through his holy men that wrote his word, is Christ. The seed of the woman, the seed of Abraham. Now, think back to that seed promised in Eden, the one who would overcome. We said it was Christ. This presents us a link between the Edenic and the Abrahamic. Right? We use those expressions, Edenic with Eden, Abrahamic connected with Abraham. These two promises. And in passing, we're told that Jesus was born to be King of the Jews, cementing the fact that Israel, that's the Jews, are referred to in the national blessing, who would inherit the land. And not another people, not another nation. It came through Isaac. Jesus Christ was of the lineage of Abraham through Isaac. Other races identify with Abraham, but through another son, primarily through Ishmael. But this promise is through Isaac. In Isaac shall thy seed be called, we are told. And this now brings us to our third promise for consideration, and that's another 1,000 years or so on from the time of Abraham. So we went from Eden, a couple of 1,000 years to Abraham, and another 1,000 years on from there brings us to about 1,000 BC, and we find that the next one being addressed here is King David. King David. In 2 Samuel chapter 7 presents another of those assurances that God will do or give something. Right? He will do or give something. He presents those assurances in these words from 2 Samuel chapter 7, 12 to 16 is the particular bracket of verses. I know there's a lot of words there on the screen, but we only need to come halfway down to hear say. Right? He's talking to King David, and he makes this promise, gives this assurance. When your days are fulfilled and you sleep with your fathers, he said, God making the assurance, will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels. Right? You'll be directly in the line of one that comes, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build an house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father. He shall be my son. Okay, so this is the promise that God gives. And he says, if he commits iniquity, I'll chasten him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I put away before you, David. And your house, David, and your kingdom shall be established forever before you, before your face, right? Before your face. Your throne shall be established forever. Now, this is when your days are fulfilled and you're going to sleep with your fathers. You're dead and you're buried. But I'll establish it before your face. It shall be an ongoing, everlasting kingdom. What stands out here? Seed, singular, your seed. I will be his father, my son. Thy seed is my son. I'm his father. What's that telling us? Well, we have there seed, singular, his, singular, he, singular, son, singular, right? We get the picture. Here's a promise concerning a descendant of King David who would come and accomplish the great things that were declared in this bracket of verses, culminating in an everlasting throne. Well, it's obvious that this hasn't been fulfilled as yet. It was speaking of a future time, a future day. Why? Because it's talking about the Son of God coming and reigning on the throne of David forever. Well, David recognised that this had a future aspect, a long tail to it, when he assessed what God had said concerning his house would be yet for a great while to come. That's what David says in verse 19. 2 Samuel 7, verse 19. You have spoken of your servant's house for a great while to come. Well, the fulfilment of these words could not apply to Solomon any more than the promise to Abraham would find fulfilment in his son Isaac, or the promise to Eve would find fulfilment in her son. All are fulfilled in God's Son. 2 Samuel 7:14, I will be his father, he will be my son. It's pretty simple. It's quite clear. And to support just how straightforward these words are, look at what the angel Gabriel said. This is what he revealed to Mary, who was to be the mother of the Son of God. I will be his father, he'll be my son. But the angel said to Gabriel, behold, thou shalt conceive and in thy womb bring forth a son, call his name Jesus. He shall be great. He shall be called the Son of the Highest. I will be his father. Right? And the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. He shall reign over the house of Jacob forever. Of his kingdom there shall be no end. Can you see the connection of these words with what we just read in 2 Samuel 7 about the ongoing permanence of this throne, that the Son of the Highest, who now is identified by name, he is identified by name in the New Testament. The Old Testament didn't refer to him as Jesus. He had other titles, other names, Emmanuel, the branch, the stone. But here he is identified as Jesus in the New Testament, the Son of God through Mary. Well, this is amazing connections. We're putting this together. Now, later in this chapter, in this Luke chapter 1, we find these words, verses 69 to 70. In these words it says, God has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world began. So he's raised up this horn of salvation through the house, as he promised, through the house of David. Now that's interesting, isn't it? And verses 72 and 73 of Luke chapter 1, this remarkable connection: to perform the mercy promised to our fathers and to remember this is God's holy covenant, the oath which God sware to our father Abraham. Here's all these strong words. We call them promises, but they are covenants, they are oaths sworn by God to our father Abraham. The connection between what the angels spoke and those additional words from Zacharias, as the father of John the Baptist, a priest moved to say these words, the connection of these words with those words from 2 Samuel are unmistakable. And to ensure that we don't miss it, there's Peter's teaching regarding Christ reigning on David's throne in Acts chapter 2 and verse 30. He's using these same two strong words, these covenant words, where Peter emphasises in Acts chapter 2 verse 30, God had sworn with an oath. Right? God had sworn with an oath that he would do these things. Well, such are those three main promises from God, which we have given some attention to. We found each promise intricately connected with the other, starting with a seed and then a land, ultimately a throne, yet all the while reinforcing the seed and identifying him. Writing to believers in Corinth, Paul declared, God is true. All right, God is true. That means he's faithful, he's trustworthy. At 2 Corinthians 1 verse 18 to 20, God is true, and concerning Jesus Christ his Son, all the promises of God in him are yea and amen. All right? Concerning Jesus Christ his Son, all the promises of God in him are yea and amen. Yea, that means yes, yes. It's a positive affirmation of truth. And amen, let it be so, right? It's firm. It's firm. Positive and firm in Jesus Christ. It was on the reliance of these promises that gave men, that God gave to men rather, that they willingly put their lives in jeopardy. And like as David confessed about the long-term application before he died, holding on to that hope, there's references such as we find in Hebrews chapter 11, which recounts the lives of many who looked ahead in anticipation of the day when all the promises would come together and they would come to fruition. You see, there's a focal point. All these promises have a focal point in time. Yes, they have been fulfilling through time, but there's a focal point because the essence of the promise has not yet been realised. Aspects of it have been outworked. Right? Even the coming of Jesus Christ, the seed. But the sitting upon the throne of his father David, no, that's yet to be accomplished. Right? Hebrews 11, it said, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. And they were persuaded of them, they embraced them, they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims in the earth. Hebrews 11 verse 13. And from verses 33 to 38 in Hebrews 11, referring to those who had embraced them, it continues by recounting some of the life's difficulties that they experienced, the things that they went through. It says that they stopped the mouth of lions on account of their faith, right? They stood strong and they stopped the mouth of lions. They quenched the violence of fire. They escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness they were made strong, and they waxed valiant in fight, and they turned to flight the armies of the aliens, the oppressors. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. Others had trial of cruel mockings, of scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword, they wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented. It says, they wandered in deserts and in mountains and dens and caves of the earth, and it goes on, Hebrews 11. Only a complete, unwavering trust in God's promises could drive people to hold on through all these difficulties of life, all these vicissitudes and the hardships. That's what caused people to endure such afflictions, knowing that it was not all about the here and the now. They saw it afar off and were persuaded and embraced it, it says. We can do the same. Here, in our comfortable environment, we're not going through all these trials and difficulties and tortures and torments and wandering about in dens and caves like some people in some places in the earth have to put up with. But all of us, whatever our circumstance, we can have this focus on God's promise of something better about to be revealed in the earth. The promises have an end point, as I said. Well, we've looked at the promises, we've looked at the covenant, the oath, which was sworn by God. Why can we trust them? Because God is behind them. It's His word, it's His name, it's His reputation. And He declares that He changes not. And Jesus stated that God's word is truth. We're told that God cannot lie. These are fundamental characteristics revealing to us who and what God is. Now, the Bible is full of prophecies about what God purposed to do through the ages. And most importantly, they came to pass, just as He said. But He didn't give these prophecies just so we could see that He was very clever and could predict the future. There's more to it than that in God's mind, not just so we can say, well, isn't God clever? He can tell the future. But it's to encourage us. It's for us that He's done these things. Not to just show us how clever He is, but so that we can trust Him and have confidence in what He says. And so that's where we are at. Do we have this confidence? Starting with that initial statement that told us that Jesus would overcome sin and death and open the way for salvation for any who would subscribe to God's ways. That has happened. It is still happening. It's happening now. People have subscribed to these things, such as Hebrews 11. And still today, people are embracing this hope. We can embrace it now. All that these words that we've looked at tonight, all that they offer. Or we can face the reality without these promises, or without embracing or accepting or believing or trusting these promises. One's future is very bleak. Compare these two positions. Right, now we read this one tonight at the outset, 2 Peter chapter 1. Right, there are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these promises you might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. Now, that's an exceeding great and precious promise. Divine nature offered to those that accept these things and follow the prescription of God's word. On the other hand, Ephesians 2 verse 12 talks about those who are strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, without God in the world. Right, these are the two opposite ends of the spectrum, aren't they? Where would you rather sit? I mean, there's no middle course. Where would you rather sit? Would you rather be one who's embraced these great and precious promises and what they offer? Or would you rather be a stranger from the covenants of promise and without hope? I mean, to use the common parlance, it's a no-brainer. But you've got to make a decision. You either accept it or you don't. There's only two sides to choose from. No middle ground, no other alternative. God's given us two choices, life or death. Well, why would we doubt other things that are prophesied in the Scriptures concerning the future? Other things that have been spoken of. The promises of blessing for all nations. Why would we doubt that? Why do we doubt that Jesus Christ is going to return like the Bible says he will? Why do we doubt that he's going to sit upon the throne of David? Just because we can't see it now, just because it hasn't happened yet, that doesn't mean it won't and we shouldn't accept it. We've been given enough evidence to put our faith and our trust in these promises of God. So in my view, hopefully you share this view, that based on all the evidence in our hands, our Bible in our hands, as a revealed Word of God, we've established why you can trust God's promises, the one initiating these assurances. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found the episode helpful. Don't forget, most of these episodes are also available as videos on our video channel, cdvideo.org. So head over and take a look. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please get in touch or leave us a voice message. We love to hear your feedback. You can email us at btf@cdvideo.org. If you enjoyed the episode, then please share it with others. Until next time, may God bless you in your studies and your walk towards God's kingdom. Amen.